Well, Christine, it looks like we have 16 participants on today, and I would imagine a few more straggling in. We are going to have this session recorded and uploaded to the portal. I would invite anybody having any questions about accessing the portal to email me directly. I'm going to pop that in the chat, and I'm going to give it over to Christine. Thank you.
Thanks, Gretchen. So this morning I was thinking about the last time that I was at Navient, and it was February 26th, which was my birthday. And I led a lunchtime session on what we call the compassion practices and the neuroscience of compassion. Some of you may have attended that session. If you told me on February 26th of this year, when I was at Navient, that the next time that I would see you was virtually through Zoom because of a global pandemic, I never would have believed you. And when I look back at that time, I get the sensation of what the heck has happened over the course of the last 5 months. It seems like ages since I was at your headquarters. Something very strange has happened to time. And what the sensation that I'm describing to you really is the sensation of what we call emotional whiplash. Emotional whiplash happens when there is a very acute, very abrupt crisis. And for so many of us, that is how COVID descended upon us. We heard some information about it, but all of a sudden it was here. And so the shifts and the changes and the transitions that we had to start navigating were very abrupt. If you look back roughly to mid-March, I know that I looked at my calendar before coming into this class today and saw that my last live training was on March 20th. When you look back at that time, chances are this is what happened. There was an incredible threat that was present that we didn't quite understand. It descended very abruptly, and we had to act very swiftly. And when we have to act very swiftly in response to crisis, we begin to get tunnel vision. And the reason that we get tunnel vision is a good one. We have to put one foot in front of the other and do what we need to do in order to survive. So although anxiety might have been present along with a host of a number of other stressors, we sort of had to put all of that on the back burner. We had to put on the back burner all the ways that we were potentially feeling about this in order for us to put one foot in front of the other to handle our professional lives, to handle our personal lives, and to handle our family lives. So we did the best that we could. And if you're here with me, you survived that. And then what tends to happen is there's sort of a lull. We still know that we're in crisis, and we still know we're in change, and we still know that we're in transition. But there's a little bit of a lull. And you're not alone if some of you are feeling that anxiety starting to bubble up. Some of you might be feeling moments of or days of a little bit of depression, even the blues. You might notice that your irritability tolerance is very low. You might notice that you are profoundly exhausted, regardless of how much rest that you're getting. And the reason that you're feeling that way is because in this lull, all the stuff that we put on the back burner is beginning to come to the forefront. And so you're not alone. In other words, your system, your physical system, the system of your brain, your neurological system is getting a little bit of a break. And it's really beginning to communicate with you loud and clear. It's time to take care of me. So what's interesting about the period of time right now, here as I sit working with you today, is that there is already the bubblings of, or the signs of, another round of all of this beginning to emerge, like a second wave of sorts. And a lot of this has to do with some really important decisions that many of us are having to make right now. Do we return to our workplaces? Do we need to continue to shelter in place? For those of us who have children, what's going to happen in the fall related to school and their social lives? Are we going to get sick? Are we going to get sicker? So there's that uncertainty that remains looming. So this lull might feel very temporary. But I want to focus today on the notion of what I call personal and professional whiplash, which is something that tends to occur when a threat descends. What is more threatening than a global pandemic? Something that we don't know a lot about, something that is still lurking out there, and we still don't have a sense of its full impact. What's different about this crisis from other crises that I've experienced in my lifetime is that this one is not time bound. We can't necessarily say, oh, this will all be over in 6 months or a year. We don't have a time frame on this. And so we continue to do what we need to do. We move forward, we walk forward, we put one foot in front of the other with this threat still looming. So it's really important that we name, when we have a period of time where we can take a moment to reflect, where we get to name what has happened and what is happening. So back at the beginning, mid-March, here are some of the things that felt like real threats to us, and for many of us remain a threat. There was a threat to our physical health. There remains a threat to our physical health. You may have noticed that your family and intimate and supportive relationships have radically shifted. Many of us are living together at home 24/7. And you may have never done family life like this before. You might have been homeschooling your children and working from home, and you may be facing that again in the fall. For those of us who have been away from family members due to social distancing, there might be a lot of loneliness, and there's a lot of stress that is associated with social isolation. Our financial well-being has been threatened. Our professional stability has been threatened. Some of us don't know that we're going to have jobs. Some of us have lost our jobs. Some of us are still in our jobs, but we're taking on very different roles. So that kind of stability that we enjoyed back in February might not be there anymore. And then there is national and global security issues. We may not quite feel safe on our own planet. That's a lot. Any one of these threats to you is a lot. To have these occurring simultaneously is monumental. And when I look at my own autobiography, when I look at my own timeline, I have never been in a position where I felt that my physical health, my relational well-being, financial well-being, professional stability, and my national and global security was all under threat. Our systems are absolutely brilliant. We were born hardwired for the stress response, which helps us to brilliantly manage the threats that we face. But man, our stress response, our hard wiring has been pushed to the limit because there's been so much threat. And in many cases, we feel completely out of control in terms of what we can actually do to make ourselves secure. As I mentioned at the start of this webinar, much of the stress that we felt initially was fueled by the fact that this descended upon us very quickly. Abruptly, we had to act fast. All human beings globally begin to feel stressed when their situation is unpredictable and uncertain. every human being globally needs to have a sense of predictability and certainty. We actually thrive in predictability and certainty. But when those things are threatened, stress response kicks in and we begin to feel its effects. There's something else that I want to name here, because I'm certain that you're all aware of it, but you might not be conscious of the degree to which it has impacted your life. And so when I talk to people who are 5-6 months into this crisis, and they tell me, I feel like I'm coping fairly well, but I don't feel myself, and I don't quite know what that's about. I always take them into really important questions about loss, because most of us are experiencing loss at different levels. And I want to introduce you to 4 notions of loss. And you might ask yourself, have I experienced any of these, or am I experiencing any of these? And if you want to better understand people in your life and why they might be feeling a little bit off, you might want to have a discussion with them about the numerous losses that have been associated with this drastic change and transition. There is defined loss, and that's loss that we can see, we can name, and we can define. The loss of my health, the loss of life, the loss of a job, the loss of a particular way of being, right? It's very overt and very obvious. And then there is something called limbo loss. I personally know about 5 people who are experiencing limbo loss. They have been exposed to someone who's been diagnosed with COVID, and they just took their own tests, and they're awaiting the test results. They are in an agonizing period of time as they wait to find out whether they've been infected or not. That is called limbo loss. That's when we're not quite sure if we've lost or not. And one of the ways in which they may have lost is they may be losing access to their work because they're going to have to self-quarantine. They may lose aspects of their own health if they exhibit symptoms. They could potentially lose their lives. So limbo loss occurs when a loss is possible, but I'm not quite sure if it's going to happen or not. Again, a good example of that is I'm not feeling well. I go get some tests run, and I have to wait 5 days for the results. It's that agonizing period of time when I don't quite know, have I lost or not? It's actually one of the most painful losses and difficult experiences a human being can have. Anticipatory loss is, I know I'm going to lose. It's just a matter of time. We may have this sense, or we may have been told that, we can only keep you employed for the next 5 months, and then we're going to have to let you go. That's anticipatory loss. Another example of anticipatory loss is when you know your child is going to go off to college for the first time in the fall. You know it's coming. Another form of anticipatory loss is when you yourself might be getting ready to leave a job to take a new job. There's loss associated with that, even if what's coming is something we might celebrate or feel good about. Moving is a form of anticipatory loss. I know that I'm moving at the end of September, and so I'm beginning to feel the symptoms of those loss. One of the most important forms of loss that so many are experiencing now but don't have a name for is what we call morning dreams. This is the loss that's associated around something that we have dreamed about, something that we have thought about for a very long time. If you're a parent who has a graduating student and they weren't able to have their kindergarten graduation or their 8th grade graduation or their high school graduation or their college graduation in the way that you dreamed about for them or that they dreamed about, that's called mourning a dream. So many weddings have been canceled. I have a close friend who's going to have a baby in August, and she has written quite brilliantly and has published some of her blogs around what it has meant to be pregnant during the time of COVID. She is feeling the loss of not getting to have the kind of pregnancy she always imagined for herself, which included a baby shower that was held on Zoom. So the reason that I include this slide is because loss contributes to our sense of whiplash. Wait a minute. This is what I always imagined. This is what I thought was going to happen. What the heck is going on? My head is spinning. Loss, regardless of the type of loss that's here on this screen, is inherently stressful. And it's really important that I name that. And mostly when loss is present and it manifests as a form of stress, we feel exhausted by it. So again, I present this to you not because necessarily you're feeling these things, but if you have people in your life that are just feeling a little bit off, this might be why. And when we can name it, whatever it is, we can tame it. If I can define what it is that I'm feeling and experiencing it, I can make a plan to best meet it, to best deal with it. All of these things that I've laid out here create what we call and what we experience as emotional whiplash. This feeling of, whoa, what happened? This feeling of disorientation, this feeling that I don't know when I'm going to get off the roller coaster. I might be sort of in that lull of the roller coaster ride where, you know, we're making the climb and we haven't quite reached the top, but I know eventually we're coming down again, right? That is what it has felt like. Or I'm on the carousel ride and I'm feeling really dizzy and really nauseous and I just want to get off, right? What happened? Did I even buy the ticket to this ride in the first place? One of the things that I want to talk with you about today is the very unique ways that stress expresses itself during crisis. And I want to make an important distinction here. So there's stress that we can feel that actually is really productive. For example, before I come on to do a webinar, I deal with my own levels of anxiety about these things, which is stressful. But it is a stress that I can channel into feeling really excited because I love the work that I do. In fact, if I didn't have a little bit of stress related to presenting in this way, I would really worry about my presentation. It would probably be very flat and monotone. So I appreciate the stress. Stress can be enormously productive. It can be very motivating. And then there is stress that is chronic in nature, which begins to really wear us down. It kind of erodes all parts of our system. And then there is stress that is related to crisis that is not time-bound and is chronic. And we are in that now. So many of us, myself included, have spent the last 5 months experiencing chronic stress. Every one of us here expresses stress in a certain way. We all have our own unique ways that we express stress. But it's likely expressing itself in ways that are rather peculiar for you or somewhat different. And I want to give you some highlights here. Things that you might be experiencing. For example, in the physical body, you might be noticing insomnia or disrupted sleep. This is one of the things that many people have been reporting as we come into this lull. Maybe 2 months ago, you were sleeping through the night because you were completely exhausted. But now that has shifted and you find that your sleep is disrupted. You're not able to get to sleep because that anxiety is present or is more conscious to you. You might find that your dreams are crazy. Many of us are dreaming really in really vivid and extreme ways. It's one of the ways in which the unconscious mind is processing everything that we're dealing with right now. I like to think about my dream life right now as a very large incinerator. It's sort of all the stuff that I've been thinking about all day has gone to the garbage truck, is being incinerated, and is coming out or manifesting in my own mind as these really vivid, somewhat wild dreams. You may have noticed that you're feeling drawn to overeat or undereat. Stress will do that. Again, you might notice not just exhaustion, but acute, profound levels of exhaustion. Every once in a while, I find myself on the couch in the late afternoon hours, and I will go into the deepest sleep almost immediately. That's stress, stress-related exhaustion. You might notice compromised immunity during a time where we don't want our immunity compromised. You might notice that there are changes in your cognitive functioning. I'm realizing this now. Again, the stress descended. I need to put one foot in front of the other. I need to move forward. Tunnel vision. Now we're in a lull. And all the cognitive implications of that kind of stress are starting to appear. You might notice that you've got some brain fog. Remember, brain fog is not just, where are my car keys? Brain fog is, I can't find my car keys and they're in my hand. Brain fog is, where are my sunglasses? And I'm ripping the house apart, tearing the house apart looking for sunglasses, and they're on my forehead. Brain fog is something major has fallen through the cracks of my work schedule. You might notice what I call intrusive or replay thinking. You can't quite let go of this one particular thought. It is sort of like having a rotten song on replay in your head, right? I don't want to be thinking this, and it just keeps playing over and over again. Again, you might notice that tunnel vision. Tunnel vision really helps us in the moment of acute crisis, but it is not productive when it is all the time, because it prevents us from seeing the fuller picture. And for those of us who might be here who lead or manage others, we have to be very careful about tunnel vision, very careful about it. Yes, we need to get our jobs done. We need to put one foot in front of the other, but we simultaneously need to see the larger picture, especially now, in order to be able to contribute in really productive and effective ways to our company, to our organization, to Navient. We also might notice that the nature of our thoughts, our thinking, are pretty fear-based right now and very reactive. So whenever you find that your fuse is very, very small, and it doesn't take much to light you up or to put you in a position where you're about to explode, okay? Just take a moment and understand that that's one of the unique ways that stress is expressing itself right now. None of this should be a surprise to you. Moderate to high levels of anxiety, moderate to high levels of depression, lower levels of what I call the blues. And you might find, wow, yesterday I was completely in the pits, and today I'm fine. So you might notice that it's very erratic, or I spent my morning really feeling blue and pessimistic. And then after lunch, I had a totally different outlook. All part of the unique way that stress expresses during chronic stress. Again, high reactivity and just not feeling yourself. I have heard this very recently so much. I feel like I'm coping pretty well, but I don't quite feel like myself. The next time I see you, which is in 2 weeks, I'm going to spend the hour talking about the very unique ways that stress expresses itself in your relationships. It's a really important webinar because it's important that we, during this time, really strengthen our relationships, kind of storm-proof them, because we need each other now more than ever. And you might notice, in terms of your own professional functioning, maybe you're not feeling as engaged in your work as you usually do. It's hard right now. You might not be feeling as effective. You might not be feeling as productive. And if you're like me and stress is present, you might be feeling completely scattered. If anyone were to come into my home, you would see little piles of work everywhere, little Zoom stations set up all over my home that I set up depending on the time of day and the lighting. And when our personal space, whether it's your office or your home, feels so scattered, it begins to have an impact on your mind, and vice versa. If the mind feels very scattered, it's going to impact the kinds of things that are happening in your space. So I wanted to present those ideas to you because I wanted you to think, okay, there is stress, there's positive and productive stress, and then there's stress that is related to some sort of situation. And then there is what we're in now, which is an unprecedented level of stress that is related to an ongoing crisis that's causing a lot of change and transition. This next slide is really important because it makes a distinction between change and transition. Most people use these words interchangeably, but they're actually quite different. Change refers to external things that have shifted as a result of a different way of being, a different way of working, or as a result of an external circumstance like a global pandemic. All kinds of changes. I have to wear a mask when I go to the grocery store. If I'm back in the workplace, I have to social distance. Change. We can't sit together anymore at a common lunch table or share a common kitchen in our workplace. Change. My children are at home all day working on their laptops for school. That's change. Transition refers to the psychological and the emotional ways in which we handle everything that's different externally. And again, if you're here and if part of the work that you do requires that you lead and manage others, please know that part of what you're doing is you're helping them to manage all of the change that might be happening related to their professional lives and the work that they do. But I want you to also know that they are going through, as you are, their own transitions. Transition being the psychological and emotional response to the external shifts. Another thing that you might want to think about if you have children or family members, you might want to think about, okay, how are they emotionally dealing with all of the external changes that have occurred around them? So sometimes as human beings, we focus on the change and we don't give enough attention to the transition that's associated with the change, which is really, really closely tied to our humanity. So here's the thing. There's a lot going on. And if I had to end this webinar here, I would be ending on a real downer because I just I put out on the table why it is that so many of us are feeling the impact of this unprecedented chronic stress, chronic level of stress. But here's the good news. We get to choose how it is that we are going to manage this. The word manage, I don't like to use it when I refer to stress because managing sort of implies a wrangling of sorts, sort of a grappling with something. I like to use the word meet. One of the things that I know for certain, I might not like it, but I know for certain, is that every day despite my good intentions, there is something that I'm going to have to face that feels stressful. That's just life. But what I also know is that I can trust that I have inner resources that are going to help me to meet whatever comes into my orbit today in a way that I can handle. And having that trust in myself is incredibly powerful. And I want you to have that kind of trust too. One of the things that we've learned about ourselves, because again, if you're here, you've survived quite a bit over the course of the last 5 months, and applaud yourself for that, truly. And know that you're here because there's some part of you that is incredibly resilient, and that you have exercised that resiliency over the last 5 months. And what I want to do here in the second part of the webinar is to give you some tools to better choose on a daily basis your responses. So very quickly, I want you to know that whenever stress is present, there are 2 responses that the brain typically tends to have. And as I'm talking about these things, I just want you to ask yourself, where does my brain go? Does my brain go to stress response, or does my brain go to what is called pleasure reward response? And you might notice that you go to both of these places depending on what the situation is, or you've already been to both of these places 5 times already today. They're very natural. Stress response. Something feels very threatening to me, something's happening, I'm feeling uncomfortable, so I go into stress response. I am ready to fight, I am ready to flee, or I will freeze and shut down. That's our stress response. And we are grateful that these bodies and these brains are equipped to do those things, because when I am in true threat, I need to be able to fight. I need to be able to run if necessary. And sometimes I need to be able to freeze and shut down. Cortisol is the main hormone that's present when we're in stress response. Really helps us to do those 3 things: fight, flee, freeze. Grateful for it. It is no good for us to be in stress response all the time. And I promise you, there are so many in your life right now that have been in stress response for 5 months. It wears at the system, it drains, it depletes, it will make us sick. Pleasure reward response. Something happens, it's upsetting, I feel discomfort, it feels threatening to me. I don't want to feel this way. So I am going to seek a way to override all of my discomfort. Best example that I can give, we've all done this, I'm going straight to the refrigerator. I can't tell you how many times over the course of the last 5 months I have taken a break from work and I'm standing in front of my refrigerator, staring into it, looking for something to grab that's going to override something pleasurable, rewarding, that's going to override the feeling of discomfort that I have. That might be ice cream, that might be comfort food. Endlessly scrolling through social media. It sort of take me away from what it is that I'm feeling. The main hormone that dominates during pleasure reward response is dopamine. Dopamine is like a warm blanket. It makes us feel really good and cozy. But here's the problem with dopamine. We generate it and then it dissolves. It doesn't last very long. And then we're back to the discomfort. So you can see how a cycle can develop. Feeling discomfort, seeking ice cream, lots of dopamine, feel comforted, dopamine wears off, seeking comfort, right? Again, we all do this and it's fine. It's very natural. But we're not meant to be in that stress response all the time. It depletes the system. It can make us sick. It drains us. It's not healthy. Very common ways for human beings to respond to stress. Again, you may have done some version of this already several times today. But then there is this other response. It's a neurological response that is known as tend and befriend. It comes from the work of Shelley Taylor, Dr. Shelley Taylor, at the University of California at Berkeley. The tend and befriend response triggers those parts of the brain that are highly capable of compassion and self-compassion, and generate the secretion of a really important hormone that is known as oxytocin. Like dopamine, oxytocin makes us feel very, very protected and safe. Oxytocin makes us feel very relaxed. Oxytocin takes us out of defense mode where we're fighting or running or resisting or freezing and shutting down. It actually opens us up. But tend and befriend isn't natural to us. We are biologically wired for it, just as we're wired for protection and safety, just as we're wired to fight, flee, freeze. We are wired to nurture and to nourish. It is a really important part of our hardwiring as human beings, but we don't tend to strengthen that wiring. I want my neurological default. I want that default system to be oxytocin, tend and befriend. Because if I can go there in the face of stress, if I can choose, I don't want to do stress response right now. I don't want to do pleasure reward response right now. I'm going to choose tend and befriend. The more I choose it, the stronger I begin to build new neural pathways in my brain so that over time, when stress arises, tend and befriend will become my default. But that takes practice. What I'd like to do is I would like to just talk to you very briefly about a tendency that we tend to move into when a lot of stress is present, and what I call, or what is known as, the neuroscience of compassion. Think about this. I want you to think about moments when you think that something isn't going very well. And many of you have had many moments, I'm certain, during this pandemic where you're thinking, life is not going well right now. And the situation is something that I cannot control. One of the first things we tend to do as human beings is we will self-criticize. It's our go-to when we think that something isn't quite right or something has gone off the rails. That is what we do. Very, very common. The problem with that is that when I go into self-criticism, self-judgment, negative self-talk, sometimes when I go into inner bullying, like I really am hard on myself, my system is under attack. So I become the attacker and the attacked simultaneously. Self-criticism, negativity, self-judgment, being really critical of yourself, hard on yourself, actually creates the stress response. Because there's some part of you that feels like it's being attacked. So there's a lot that feels like it's not quite right now, right at this time. So I want you to just start to monitor when you're feeling that way. Are you becoming really critical of yourself? And I would also add that if we are really critical of others, blaming others, being in that mentality too, that too is draining. Judging, blaming, evaluating, bullying, negative thinking about, talking about others is never going to generate oxytocin. It's going to generate that stress hormone. So the reason I include this is because, again, it's one of our go-tos when we're feeling stressed about something over which we cannot control. Just notice, do I drop into some self-criticism? And know that that stresses the system. So back to tend and befriend. As our practice, I want to take you through what is known as the Tend and Befriend guided meditation experience. I want to do this for two reasons. It's really, really a simple practice. We're going to spend about 3 to 5 minutes in it, and that's all we need. That's all we need to begin to generate our own oxytocin and to begin to trigger that part of the brain. It's a really important part of the brain that has the capacity for compassion, so that you begin to see and feel and understand that compassion benefits everyone. It benefits you and your own system. It benefits those around you. And so does self-compassion. The studies by Dr. Kristen Neff and Dr. Christopher Germer on self-compassion are alarmingly positive. They are shocking in the findings about what practices of compassion and self-compassion do for our neurological, biological systems. And when you think about a time when you felt really compassionate towards another person, you were really caring for another person, chances are you were not in stress response. You were not in pleasure reward response. You were in tend and befriend. So in tend and befriend, the stressor is here. I'm feeling the threat. I'm feeling uncomfortable. But rather than stress response, rather than seeking pleasure reward, I tend to it, much like I would tend to a hurt child. You're in the presence of a hurt child. You don't fight. You don't run. You don't freeze, shut down. We don't seek pleasure. We sit down with that child and we tend to the suffering in a kind and friendly way. We can do the same for ourselves and create that cascade of chemical, neurological changes. So I'd like to invite you to this experience of what we call the Tend and Befriend practice. Most of you have your cameras off. And if you don't have your camera off, I can't see everyone because the slides are up. I want to invite you to go ahead and do that. Or to leave it on, it's perfectly fine. It sometimes feels more private. I want to make sure that everyone's muted so there isn't any background noise. And if you are in a place where you can actually lay down and experience this meditation, go ahead and do that so that you can derive the benefit of a little extra rest here at the middle part of your day. So if it feels comfortable for you, I'd like to invite you to close your eyes. And just for the next few moments, I want to invite you to just take your awareness to your breath. And maybe take 3 long, deep breaths. And with each exhalation, just allow yourself to let go of anything that feels heavy today. And with each exhalation, just allow yourself to just come into this next 3 to 5 minutes as a gift to yourself. And just relax. Just 3 deep breaths. Just 3 deep breaths can take us out of stress response. So as your system begins to settle just a little bit now, I want you to gently bring to mind something that's been really challenging for you. Just one thing. Something that's felt really heavy. Something that you would kind of benefit from letting go of, if just for a little while. Just bring that to mind really gently. And now I want you to imagine the image of someone in your life that you can always rely on for support. Someone who really cares about you. And using the power of your own imagination, I want you to turn to that person whose arms are open right now and just put that issue, whatever it is, just give it to them. Just hand it over and just allow them to hold it. And make sure that you have given over every part of it. It's okay. You can take it back at the end of this meditation, but just give it away. And for the next few moments, I want you to imagine that they can hold it and they want to. And just notice how it feels to be the recipient of compassion. To have another human being who's willing to hold whatever's been burdening you. And I'd like you to notice how it feels to just be free of that, to be free of that burden. And just having that quieting experience. And just knowing that within the last 3 to 5 minutes, we have shifted out of stress response. And we have generated that oxytocin. Which is so nourishing and so helpful to a system that's really been taxed. And take a very deep breath in and exhale. And again, a deep breath in and exhale. One more time. Deep breath in and exhale. And whenever you're ready, open your eyes. So just a couple of things before I depart. What happens during that meditation, if you remember, is I asked you to just settle the system with 3 breaths. 3 to 6 breaths. Just if you forget everything I said here today, remember that 3 to 6 long, deep breaths can move us out of stress response. So we did 3 breaths, settling down the system. I ask you to very just gently bring something to mind that's been troubling for you. Just hold it there without getting upset by it. But yeah, this is something that I've been carrying that feels really troubling. And then bringing to mind someone in your life who's just really supportive and just handing it over. And the handing over part can be really tough for some of us, especially if we are
Let's turn off the electronics. Look out the window. We're going to get to the beach soon. Okay, guys?
Hey, Gretchen, can you mute yourself? I'm not sure she. So we handed it over, and then I wanted you to have the experience of being able to rest, knowing that you were the recipient of compassion. And again, whether you're the giver of compassion or the recipient of compassion, what's really important here is knowing that when you can get yourself into that state very authentically, you are generating that oxytocin. And so in the midst of a very challenging situation, when you're feeling a high degree of stress, remember that you can choose how you're going to meet it. Maybe you want to go into stress response because you need to. Maybe you want to go towards pleasure reward. And maybe following today's session, you can choose tend and befriend, which means I just pause in my own mind. I don't have to sit on a cushion. I don't have to go into a meditation. I just pause and I say to myself, okay, this is really stressful. And I'm going to take care of this. And I'm going to do it in a really nurturing, kind way. Oxytocin. So that I remain calm. I feel protected. I know that I have the inner resources to meet whatever it is. I'm not going to fall apart. I'm here. You're all here. And I know that I'm not going to drain and deplete my system by adding more stress to it. So this is a quick hour. Again, so much going on. I just wanted you to have a sense of what emotional whiplash is, why it's happening, how it might be manifesting in your life. To know that there are those 3 neurological responses. The first 2 tend to be our go-tos. We don't even think about it, we just go to them. But then there is this third option, which is a mindfulness-based option, because we have to be aware of it and we have to choose it. So 2 weeks from now, I will be back, and again, we'll be talking about what it means to cultivate relationship resiliency, because all this stress that we're feeling and expressing spills over and into our closest personal and professional relationships. So if you've been feeling some of that, please come back. And I also invite you to bring family members if you think that they might benefit from being part of that webinar as well, especially if you're working from home. Also, Gretchen, did you want to say some things about the portal? And if there are any questions that come up, I'm happy to stay on.
Yes, I just wanted to invite everybody. Most of you accessed today's webinar from the portal. And I just wanted you to invite you to stay there and take a look around. We have guided meditation, we have movement practices, and we will also have a recorded version of what Christine presented today. That will be up in about 3 days. So feel free again to go back and look at that and share it, like Christine mentioned, with family members or coworkers. And we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Gretchen. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Well, it was good to be with you here. Again, I feel my own sense of whiplash, knowing that the last time I was with several of you was in February. So have a great 2 weeks. We'll see you back here for relationship resiliency. and take very good care of yourselves. Again, remember, when that stress kicks up, tend and befriend, and be incredibly kind to yourselves. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Take good care.